In ancient Egypt, a revolution is brewing. The most ambitious building project ever conceived sets off a chain of events that will transform the nation.
This would have been an epoch-changing event.
Buried in the sands of Egypt is a tale of a powerful pharaoh who would become a god and revolutionize his country. This is the legend of the world's first pyramid. The story of Egypt's pyramids is one of innovation.
It was a resurrection machine.
And mysterious rituals.
These are things that help the deceased re-energize and live for eternity.
Back-breaking work and palace intrigue, unlocking the deepest secrets of the pharaohs.
Every mummy is different. You never know exactly what to expect.
Exploring the lives of ancient workers and revealing the remarkable story of Egypt's ancient kingdom.
Not only did ancient Egypt make the pyramids made ancient Egypt.
Egypt's pyramid building age, 500 years, during which some of the world's most remarkable monuments were constructed, including the Great Pyramid of Giza, the only wonder of the ancient world still standing. To understand how the Pyramid Age began and how it transformed the nation, we need to travel nearly 4,700 years back in time to the city of Memphis and the palace of a powerful king. His people called him Net-Jereket, meaning divine of body. But today we know this pharaoh as Djoser. He ruled a nation of more than 1 million people. As pharaoh, his first priorities were to maintain control of his kingdom and strengthen his dynasty. Djoser was born into a life of privilege around 2620 BCE. Although it was common for a pharaoh to have multiple wives, Djoser is believed to have married just one woman, Heta-Pherenebti, his half-sister.
Normal people did not have incestual relationships with their brothers and sisters in ancient Egypt. That wasn't a common thing to do.
By marrying his sister, Djoser ensured that only his bloodline would have a claim to the throne.
It's really a desire to keep power within the family.
Djoser's incestuous marriage reinforced the immense power that he enjoyed.
The pharaoh in ancient Egypt is everything. Commander-in-chief, high priest, in charge of making all the laws and decrees. So the most important person, obviously, in the land.
Like other kings before him, he claimed to rule alongside the gods, working together to keep order and unity in Egypt.
From the very origins of ancient Egyptian kingship, the king is a mediator between humans and the gods. And that seems to be something fundamental to ancient Egypt.
The king was responsible for keeping the gods happy. And if the gods were happy, then the people would be fed, and the kingdom would continue to go on in a world of order.
But a devastating catastrophe would put Djoser's authority to the test. Clues to the disaster lie 650 kilometers south of the ancient capital of Memphis, in a region called Elephantine. According to the ancient Egyptians, this was the source of the River Nile. Egyptologist Jean-Pierre Patznik specializes in deciphering long-lost languages. Today, he's investigating a stone plaque known as a stela.
There it is. The famine stela.
Ça, c'est un document absolument unique. C'est une histoire qui est racontée qui se serait passée sous le règne de Djoser.
The words engraved on this rock tell a tale of death and devastation. The Nile was the lifeblood of Egypt, flowing from the south towards the north. Every year, between June and September, floods carried fertile silt and water to the farmland in the north, where most people lived. But in the 18th year of Djoser's reign, the floods failed.
The stela tells us an absolutely amazing story. A famine that would have lasted 7 years. 7 years of poverty, 7 years during which the Nile failed to water the crops. For Pharaoh, there's nothing worse. And naturally, Djoser tries to figure out what is happening. Why don't the waters of the Nile arrive? What's going on? Why is there no flood?
This stela was carved over 2,000 years after the event. So for a long time, the story of the famine was dismissed as a legend. But the Nile holds many secrets. And in Washington, D.C., researchers at the U.S. Geological Institute have found evidence that could support the famine stela myth. Christopher Bernhardt is a pollen specialist. He's analyzed soil containing pollen grains that settled on the banks of the Nile during the pyramid building age, 4,500 years ago.
Pollen is really cool. It's such a powerful tool. So it's not just this thing that every spring season makes you sneeze, right? It provides so much information as it gets deposited.
These are core samples from the Nile Delta, cylinders of earth bored from the river soil. These cores are like time machines, enabling scientists to look back thousands of years, revealing the secrets of the Nile.
If we take a core and go through time, looking at the pollen, it can give you information about regional climate. It can tell you about sea level change. You can reconstruct past environments. We don't have the resolution in our records to get to see how variation happened from year to year or even decade to decade. But there were actually some episodic droughts during the time of pyramid building. Our record shows that's definitely within the realm of possibility.
The famine stela describes how 7 years of drought and famine brought chaos to Djoser's kingdom. Desperate to survive, brother turned on brother. Law and order broke down. Egypt was on the brink of civil war. Djoser asked his priests for guidance. But they didn't know what to do. The Pharaoh was under pressure. Previous kings had been overthrown in the turmoil of famine.
If the gods were unhappy with the king, there would be retribution. So there was a direct cause and effect relationship between the king doing his job properly and the people being able to survive.
So the king would certainly be aware of what would result from mismanaging such a situation.
Djoser summoned his most trusted advisor, a man called Imhotep.
He's asking his vizier Imhotep to find out why the flood is not coming.
The kingdom and both their lives could be at stake. Imhotep traveled to Elephantine Island, the supposed source of the Nile, to investigate. Here, legend has it that he bathed in the water of the Nile and then fell asleep on the bank. In his dreams, Imhotep was visited by a god known as Khnum.
He found out that the god who is controlling the Nile, God Khnum, is unhappy because he's not receiving the sufficient offering that he should receive.
Imhotep woke, convinced he'd found the answer.
If we're nice to Khnum, Khnum will be nice, and good inundations, good floods will come back.
Imhotep reported his vision to the king, and Djoser gave the order to restore and reinstate a temple for Khnum that had long been abandoned.
Ici, nous avons donc Djoser,
This is Djoser, with the crown of Upper and Lower Egypt.
qui fait une offrande.
He is making an offering to 3 deities, including an important one, Khnum, the god of the source of the Nile.
The famine stealer tells us that Djoser's intervention saved the day, and Khnum allowed the Nile floods to return. One way or another, the famine ended. And during Djoser's reign, there was an extraordinary change in the way ordinary people viewed the king.
Really, with Djoser, we see probably a more powerful form of the king. The idea not just that the king is an intercessor, but that the king is a type of god on earth, probably in a way that it hadn't been expressed before.
Djoser may have been a divine ruler, but he still had to prepare for his own death. The ancient Egyptian pharaoh Djoser wanted to become immortal. So he turned to the wise Imhotep for help.
Imhotep is one of the most important characters in ancient Egypt. He was a physician, he was an architect.
Most of what we know about Imhotep during the reign of Djoser, whom he seems to have served as vizier, is name and titles on a statue base.
In order for him to have his titles inscribed on a statue base of Djoser, he must have been a very, very high official.
Djoser decided to entrust Imhotep with the care of his immortal soul. He commanded him to build a tomb worthy of a god, a landmark that would survive for eternity.
We call tombs houses of the dead sometimes, but I would say the Egyptians don't think of them quite so much that way. They are machines to help propel the deceased from this world into the next and to ensure a meaningful afterlife.
This was one of their primary prerogatives in their lives, was to make sure that they would survive death so they could live on for eternity.
Traditionally, the early Egyptians had simply buried their dead in the sand. The desert would naturally preserve the bodies, and this came to be an essential part of their religion.
They thought by mummifying the body, keeping the body, it would be very important for the afterlife. This afterlife was everything to the Egyptians, not only to the kings, but also to the individuals. Those people were somehow looking for immortality, looking for their afterlife, and looking to be living again and having a second life.
But sandstorms would devastate grave sites and scatter the remains, jeopardizing survival in the afterlife. So long before Djoser, the Egyptians abandoned the sand and began to protect their pharaohs' bodies beneath tombs made of mud bricks, called mastabas.
Mastabas, the Arabic word for bench. They look like big bench tombs.
So there is a below surface structure, which is a shaft, and a small room that keeps the sarcophagus and the body and the mummy underground. And then above it, they had a place for leaving offerings for the deceased.
Charged with designing Djoser's tomb, Imhotep began by thinking big. First, he imagined the largest and most imposing brick mastaba ever built. But then he had a revolutionary idea. Instead of mud bricks, he'd use stone.
He changes history somewhat. If the Egyptians continued to build all of their major structures in mud brick, we would know far less about them today. Because mud brick, when it rains, it disappears.
Imhotep and Djoser used stone because what they wanted was to build for eternity.
It may sound like an obvious choice, but in the time before the wheel, executing it would be one of the greatest challenges in human history. Imhotep's first task was to select a location for Djoser's tomb. He needed a solid building platform and space.
Nah.
He decided on the Saqqara Plateau, a rocky incline on the west bank of the Nile.
Saqqara was a great place to build, simply because you had very solid bedrock there, and you also had a local stone that you could quarry, so you wouldn't have to go far afield in order to quarry stone that would be needed for structures.
Saqqara was in an elevated position, overlooking the capital city of Memphis on the opposite bank of the Nile.
So that meant that anything that was constructed, on this high plateau could be seen by the people below. Plus the fact it was very easy for the king to go and visit his monument as it was under construction because his palace happened to be in Memphis.
Imhotep planned to build a structure so grand and impressive that future generations would think it could only have been built by the gods. He would need a good team and a careful plan to achieve his dream. People to organize the stone quarrying, direct the cutting of building blocks, oversee their transport, and manage the huge workforce that he would assemble. This trusted group of men would form the elite of the emerging administration. Taking on this construction project would involve the mobilization of the whole country and influence the future of Egypt.
This would have been an epoch-changing event. This is not just the first time that a major, large, freestanding stone monument is constructed in Egypt, but the amount of labor that would have to be harnessed, the number of people that would have to be housed and fed in order to set it up would have been rather staggering.
The plan would require revolutionary advances, new engineering techniques, literacy, a national census, and unparalleled organization.
Probably the most important thing is the administrative structure, because the Egyptians are known as bureaucrats, and they took it to new heights.
The success of the project would also depend on good communication, so writing was key.
It's probable that part of the preparation would have been going out and making sure you had enough literate people in the right places.
The scribes were the literate class, trained to write hieroglyphs. They also used the hieratic script. This was a more common form of abbreviated hieroglyphs, increasing the recording of information. The scribes were an essential part of Imhotep and Djoser's enormous new project. They needed to know what resources and people were available to execute their plan, so they created a census drawn up by their scribes to find out.
They started listing people, where they're from, where they live, what's their lineage, whole lists of people. Because of this, they go to look for them in the villages throughout Egypt, people who are going to be ordered to work. If they had digital, they would have created massive databases. A whole country is being mobilized to supply this monument with men, equipment, and provisions. A non-stoppable and relentless logistics network is in place.
Imhotep used this network to assemble a huge workforce from all over Egypt. He would need them to implement his impossibly ambitious design. Imhotep gathered thousands of workers at Saqqara to build the pharaoh Djoser's tomb. Just getting them there was an impressive achievement. But now they had to build a monument, not only fit for a king, but also a god. Imhotep's plan was to carve a vertical shaft nearly 30 meters deep into the bedrock. His team would put the king's sarcophagus at the base of this shaft, and then construct the massive stone mastaba over the top.
He was following what had been done previously, where the kings were buried underground.
When the underground burial chamber was complete, Imhotep turned his attention to the stone monument above. Stone was not an entirely unknown material for the ancient Egyptians. For more than a century, craftsmen had been carving stone vases for use in temples.
Ancient Egyptians were already experienced in using the stones, manufacturing of the stones. They were making stone vessels, they were making also small pieces, and even we have some sculptures made of limestone and different stones.
But now, for the first time in history, Imhotep would use stonemasonry on an industrial scale. The first challenge was getting the huge stones out of the ground and onto the site. Today, their quarry is filled with sand, but part of it once encircled Djoser's tomb like a giant overlapping moat, over a mile long on each side. The snaking quarry cleverly reduced the distance they had to haul the stone. In the Cairo Museum, Egyptologist Salima Ikram is investigating ancient technology.
This is one of my favorite cases in the Egyptian Museum because it has all of the tools that the Egyptians used. So some are very basic, where you have, even now, people use the plumb bob to see if things are straight. Over here we have measuring tools, where you have pieces of wood linked by rope, and that it's marked in a particular way, so you can say it's a cubit, which is basically this long. We have chisels, just like you have them today.
The quarry workers used copper chisels and saws to cut their blocks into shapes suitable for building. It's estimated that around 70 tons of copper were needed for the construction of Djoser's tomb.
wonder people say, the pyramids are made by aliens or people from outer space, because nowadays in the world of technology that we live in, it's very hard to imagine that such basic, simple tools could achieve such great and beautiful stuff.
But who were the laborers who toiled to build this enormous tomb for the pharaoh?
They really came from everywhere around Egypt. So this project was one that was national.
We know that during the Nile flood, when it was impossible for farmers to work, some of those people would have provided an excellent base of workmen.
It's estimated that for the building, it was roughly 1% of the Egyptian population, close to about 5,000 to 10,000 people, working over a period of time.
People were conscripted to build the pyramids. So yes, someone living in a village 400 miles south probably didn't have much of a choice when the administrators came by and said, for the next season, we need you.
The Egyptians didn't use money, so the pyramid builders were paid with goods, especially bread and beer.
Beer for ancient Egyptians was something very important because it represented for them a kind of food, because beer was made of bread. It was not the same beer that we have today. It was thicker, maybe whiter, so it was somehow a kind of food for ancient Egyptians.
Ancient Egyptian beer had a hidden and surprisingly beneficial side effect.
One of the really significant aspects of beer in ancient Egypt is that the fermentation process also decreases the number of microbes in the water.
The fermentation process made it so that you weren't able to get the diseases that were in the Nile naturally. So if you couldn't boil your water, you had to ferment it to be able to drink Nile water.
The workers may have been given food and drink, but the new large-scale quarrying was a risky business.
Accidents happened, people were injured, arms were broken, legs were broken, stones were falling down, so it was a kind of a dangerous work.
Despite the injuries that his workers must have sustained, Imhotep was able to keep his project on track. Until finally, 6 years after the work began, the cut stone mastaba tomb was completed. The monument was impressive. It rose over 8 meters high, the base stretching over 60 meters in length. But when he inspected the finished tomb, Imhotep wasn't satisfied.
Imhotep had really high aspirations. So when Djoser asked him to create a space for the eternal world that's really something like nobody has seen before, I think he takes this to heart.
Imhotep approached Djoser with an ambitious new idea that would change the course of history. In ancient Egypt, the architect Imhotep was pitching an innovative idea to his pharaoh Djoser. The rectangular mastaba tomb that he'd built from stone wasn't grand enough for a god on earth. Imhotep wanted to break with tradition and create an entirely new form of tomb that would be visible for miles around. He wanted to stack several mastabas on top of each other, forming a step pyramid.
One of the beauties of the step pyramid is that you can see how Imhotep was thinking through every single one of the stages. They build mastaba on top of mastaba, each one slightly smaller than the rest.
And so we see that Imhotep has this brilliant idea of really creating the first pyramid in permanent material in ancient Egypt.
The question is why? Why did they pick this form? And the idea is that it literally, in hieroglyphs, the step pyramid hieroglyph has to do with ascend. And so it's literally Djoser's stairway to heaven.
Imhotep's design may sound simple, but stacking each layer flat could cause the monument to collapse under its own weight. So once again, he solved the problem with innovation. Imhotep developed a new construction technique. He placed the stones in layers inclined towards the center of the monument. This arrangement directed forces towards the heart of the pyramid, increasing its structural stability. By carefully distributing the forces, Imhotep ensured that as the pyramid took shape, it didn't collapse under its own weight. When the second phase of the project was complete, the world's first pyramid had taken shape. It was formed from 4 stepped levels. But Imhotep was still not satisfied. Emboldened by the stability of his innovative structure, he gave orders to add 2 more steps on top. Imhotep must have decided that he had enough time left to complete these new levels before the king died. After toiling for 19 years, Imhotep's masterpiece was finished. He'd succeeded in his mission, creating a magnificent and original tomb from stone. Something never before seen in the history of mankind. It's still standing today, almost 4,700 years later. Imhotep's team had built a pyramid that towered over 60 meters high, with sides over 100 meters long, said to contain 850,000 tons of limestone blocks. This engineering marvel still inspires awe today, and incredibly, the step pyramid is only a small part of the work carried out by Imhotep and his team at Saqqara.
So not only do you have 6 layers of this really large structure, but you also have an entire set of other buildings in this mortuary space surrounding the tomb.
There's nothing like Djoser. I mean, the Djoser complex covers 16 hectares, the size of a small town for that period.
Imhotep's team was transforming the style of building in Egypt, with innovative stone structures and elaborate new architectural features.
So it wasn't just an explosion of stone building on a gigantic scale. The artistic motifs had such finesse that they impressed and put their stamp on Egyptian architecture for the next 3 millennia.
His pyramid complex required a new kind of professionalism. Craftsmen, architects, basically people who were brought in to create the monument and professionalize the workforce.
Djoser had his monumental tomb, but what happened inside was just as important.
All of these buildings are meant to ensure immortality, and this is where the funeral services and the rituals are held, and the king's cult is perpetuated, ideally forever, for generations.
The king wanted to make sure he would be worshipped long after his death.
You have to think of pyramids as resurrection machines. They were a place that would preserve the king's body. Also, it was a place to celebrate the king's cult. And make no mistake, it was also a way to show the power of the pharaonic state.
If Djoser was to successfully become immortal, he needed to ensure that his body and soul were looked after for eternity. Egyptians believed that when a pharaoh died, his soul was divided into two parts, the Ba and the Ka.
These two elements of the human spirit that live on, the Ba and the Ka, are separate, but they're both necessary to live on into eternity.
The Ba rose to the heavens to join the gods, while the Ka remained in the tomb. The Egyptians painted their tombs with images of offerings, such as meat and wine, that they believed were essential to feed the Ka soul and keep it alive.
So the whole offering formula at a tomb is just to provide for the sustenance of the deceased.
But the Ka was not just a prisoner in a temple. On the north side of the complex is the Serdab, a sealed chamber with a small hole in the front.
This is the statue of Djoser, the statue of the royal Ka. It's in the Serdab, an enclosed place devoted to the statue and to the worship of it, because this statue is alive.
The hole isn't to see in. It's so that Djoser's Ka could oversee the rituals being held in his honor, ensuring that his legacy lived on.
What's interesting with this statue is that it looks towards the northern sky. That's where you have a group of very special stars.
These northern stars, which the Egyptians called the imperishable ones, are the constellation of Orion and the star Sirius, the brightest in the night sky.
So by facing the statue towards those stars, they were associating Djoser's spirit with astral bodies that never disappeared from the horizon.
After around 2 decades on the throne, and having overseen the construction of the world's first pyramid, Djoser died around 2560 BC and joined the eternal gods. Priests mummified his body, preserving it so it remained recognizable to his Ka soul.
Archaeological evidence suggests that Djoser's pyramid was nearly complete upon his death. And that was significant so that the pyramid, the tomb, was ready to receive Djoser's mummy, as well as any of the burial goods that would have accompanied him to the afterlife.
Djoser's carefully prepared body was transported to his grand pyramid, which hid one last secret. At the pyramid, Egyptologist Jean-Pierre Patznik has been given special access to investigate the mysterious passages hidden beneath.
Oh, wow.
Concealed under the world's first pyramid is a network of tunnels and chambers stretching over 6 kilometers. The tunnels were built to hide the burial chambers of Djoser's royal family and storerooms packed with offerings.
It goes in all directions. This is amazing.
Imhotep's workers carved these tunnels through solid bedrock descending 45 meters below ground level.
Now, this is incredible.
The pyramid builders carved this central shaft in the open air before building the monument on top. This allowed them to lower these massive granite blocks into place, creating an immense sarcophagus for the mummy of their pharaoh.
This is over 4,500 years old. It's like a big vault that shuts from above, with a granite cap that seals everything.
Djoser's body no longer lies inside this sarcophagus. It was probably looted by tomb raiders in ancient times. But one special passageway, once lined in expensive blue tiles, contains a secret.
Wow.
A chance to come face to face with the great pharaoh himself.
Oh là.
So here we have King Djoser. I'm absolutely amazed to see him like this, because it is such high quality, such great finesse. It's an incredible artwork. The detail of the lines, look at his face. The nostril is so well represented that you can still feel the breath of life. We see a muscular, slender, athletic body. We see a living king, and that's what they wanted to depict.
Djoser has been celebrated in Saqqara for thousands of years. His aim was to be remembered forever, and thanks to the world's first pyramid, he has succeeded.
It's a commemorative monument because in ancient Egypt, a man lives when his name is called. And so this was also a guarantee by Djoser that people would remember him.
But it wasn't just Djoser who achieved an immortality of sorts. Imhotep, his genius architect, would also come to be worshipped as a god.
Imhotep actually enjoys a legacy even greater than the king for whom he worked.
The legend of this man's brilliance continues on into the Greek period. So eventually, Imhotep merges with the Greek god of medicine because his brilliance was just so well known for thousands of years.
With innovative engineering, a huge workforce, and an organized structure to deploy them, Imhotep and Djoser's pyramid plan transformed their country.
I think they know by building the step pyramid, they are building Egypt. They are building the future of Egypt.
There are so many new options for what future kings are going to be able to do. They've really started the pyramid age.
The organizational structure would be key to Egypt's future.
In terms of the organization of the workforce, this is when it all started.
An increasing number of people are employed by the state and are then available and trained for state-sponsored projects.
For the commoner during the reign of Djoser, if they were to look upon this new, exciting step pyramid, would they be able to understand how much life is changing, how much society is changing? They have no idea what's to come.
Soon, new and more mighty pharaohs would stretch the limits of their power and their imagination. How far would they go? And where would their extraordinary expansion end?